That summer night, something strange drifted through the lavender fields of Provence. Sarah Mitchell had come to the small French village of Valensole for one reason: to escape. The weight of her corporate life in Boston had become unbearable, and when she saw the advertisement for a summer volunteer position helping with the lavender harvest, she didn't hesitate. 3 weeks into her stay, she had found a rhythm she'd forgotten existed. The days were long and sun-drenched, filled with the methodical work of cutting purple stems and bundling them into fragrant sheaves. The evenings were quiet, spent in the small cottage at the edge of the Beaumont family's estate. But tonight felt different. The harvest had finished that afternoon. The last of the purple flowers had been gathered, leaving the fields cropped short and somehow vulnerable in the fading light. Sarah had stayed behind after the other workers left, wanting to watch the sunset over the now barren hills one final time. The Beaumont family had retired to their main house for a celebration dinner, their laughter carrying faintly on the warm breeze. Sarah had declined the invitation, preferring solitude. As darkness settled over the countryside, she sat on the wooden steps of her cottage, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. The air was thick with the lingering scent of lavender, so strong it felt almost tangible, like a presence hovering just above the earth. Crickets began their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice before falling silent. That's when she heard it. Music. Faint and ethereal, like nothing she'd ever encountered before. It wasn't coming from the Beaumont house, that much was certain. The melody seemed to rise from the fields themselves, a haunting combination of what sounded like a violin and something else, something older. The notes hung in the air, each one crystalline and perfect, before dissolving into the next. Sarah stood slowly, her tea forgotten. Her heart had begun to beat faster, though she couldn't say why. The music wasn't frightening exactly. It was beautiful, hypnotic even. But there was something about it that made the hair on her arms stand up, something that whispered of things beyond the ordinary world. She stepped off the porch and into the night. The packed earth path was still warm beneath her bare feet from the day's sun. She moved toward the sound instinctively, following it as one might follow a thread through a labyrinth. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The harvested fields stretched out before her like a dark ocean, the stubble of cut stems creating texture in the moonlight. But as she walked deeper into the former lavender rows, something impossible began to happen. The flowers were growing back, not slowly, not over days or weeks as nature intended, but instantly. Where there had been only cut stems moments before, now tall stalks of lavender rose from the earth, their purple blooms opening as she passed. The scent intensified until it was almost overwhelming, filling her lungs with each breath. Sarah stopped, her rational mind struggling to process what her eyes were witnessing. The music grew louder. It was coming from the center of the field now, from a place she knew had been empty just hours ago. But there, beneath the moonlight, stood a figure. A woman in a long dress that seemed to be made of shadows and starlight, holding what looked like a violin, but wasn't quite right. The instrument gleamed with an inner light, and as the woman drew her bow across its strings, the lavender around her swayed in rhythm, as if dancing to a silent partner. Sarah's mouth had gone dry. She should turn back. She should run. Every logical impulse in her body was screaming at her to leave, to return to the safety of the cottage and lock the door behind her. But she couldn't. Her feet carried her forward, drawn by the music and by something else, a curiosity that burned brighter than her fear. "Hello?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper, swallowed by the night. The woman stopped playing. The sudden silence was profound, more absolute than any quiet Sarah had ever experienced. Even the crickets had ceased their songs. The figure turned slowly, and in the moonlight, Sarah could see her face. It was beautiful and ageless, with eyes that held depths of sadness and wisdom that made Sarah's heart ache just to look at them. "You can hear it," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Her voice had a musical quality, each word like a note played on an invisible instrument. She spoke in English, but with an accent Sarah couldn't place, something older than any language she knew. "The music," Sarah managed. "What is it? Who are you?" The woman smiled, but it was a melancholy expression. "I am Isabelle, or I was once. Long ago, before memory became legend and legend became forgotten." She gestured to the fields around them, and as she did, the lavender began to glow with a soft bioluminescent light. It was as if each flower contained a tiny star. "These fields remember," Isabelle continued. "They have witnessed generations of life and love and loss. They have drunk in the tears of those who have walked here, and they have celebrated with those who have found joy in their purple waves." Sarah took another step closer, mesmerized despite herself. "But why tonight? Why can I see this?" "Because you are ready to listen," Isabelle replied. She lifted her violin again, cradling it gently. Most people never truly listen. They hear sounds, yes, but they don't listen to what the world is trying to tell them. You came here seeking peace, seeking escape from a life that had become noise, and in the silence you found, you opened yourself to something deeper. The woman began to play again, and this time Sarah could feel the music in her bones. It told a story without words, a tale of love and longing, of seasons passing and returning, of endings that were also beginnings. As the melody unfolded, images began to form in Sarah's mind. She saw the fields as they had been centuries ago, wild and untamed. She saw the first farmers who had recognized the potential in the purple flowers, who had cultivated them with care and patience. She saw lovers meeting in secret beneath the stars, their whispered promises lost to time, but remembered by the earth itself. She saw soldiers returning from war, collapsing into the fragrant blooms and weeping for all they had lost. She saw children running through the rows, their laughter as eternal as the hills themselves, and she saw Isabelle, a young woman in a different era, dressed in the simple clothes of a farm worker, standing in these very fields with a violin her grandfather had made. She had played for the lavender because she believed the plants could hear, that music helped them grow stronger and more fragrant. The other villagers had laughed at her, calling her foolish, but she hadn't cared. She had known something they didn't, had felt a connection to the land that went beyond logic or reason. Then Sarah saw the tragedy. A harsh winter, crops failing, Isabelle's family losing everything. She saw the young woman standing in the frozen fields one final time, playing her violin as snow began to fall, playing until her fingers went numb and her breath came in clouds of frost. And she saw Isabelle make a choice, a desperate bargain with forces older than the village, older than the fields themselves. She had given herself to the land, had woven her spirit into the soil and the stems so that the fields would always remember beauty, would always know music, would always produce the finest lavender in all of Provence. It was a sacrifice born of love, and it had bound her here, between worlds, for generations beyond counting. The vision faded as the music came to an end. Sarah found tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't say exactly why. The sorrow and beauty of what she had witnessed had overwhelmed her defenses. "You've been here all this time," Sarah whispered. "Alone." Isabelle lowered her violin, her expression peaceful despite the sadness in her eyes. "Not alone, never alone. The fields are alive with memory, with every person who has ever walked here, every moment of joy and sorrow they have experienced. I am part of that now, part of something larger than myself." "But don't you want to be free?" Sarah asked. The woman considered this for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Free to go where? I am exactly where I chose to be, where I need to be. This is my music, my purpose. But she hesitated, and for the first time Sarah heard uncertainty in her voice. But it is good to be heard again. It has been so long since anyone truly listened. Sarah realized then what this moment meant. In the modern world of constant noise and distraction, of earbuds and screens and endless streams of content, how many people ever truly stopped to listen to the world around them? How many would ever hear the music that places like this had to offer? "I'm listening," Sarah said softly. "I'm here, and I'm listening." Isabelle's smile this time was genuine, reaching her ancient eyes. "I know you are. That's why the fields allowed you to see me, to hear my song. They knew you were someone who would understand, someone who needed to remember that there is more to life than the endless rushing forward." The glowing lavender began to dim, slowly fading back to ordinary purple blooms. Sarah could feel the moment slipping away, could sense that this window between worlds was closing. Panic fluttered in her chest. "Wait," she said quickly. "Will I see you again?" Isabelle shook her head gently. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But you will carry this with you always, this knowledge that the world is deeper and stranger than most people ever realize. You will remember that there is music in silence, that there is beauty in slowing down, that there are mysteries that cannot be solved, only experienced." She raised her violin one final time. "Close your eyes, Sarah Mitchell. Let the music carry you home." Sarah wanted to protest, wanted to argue that she wasn't ready for this to end, but something in Isabelle's voice compelled obedience. She closed her eyes, and immediately the music began again. It was different this time, softer and more intimate, like a lullaby sung by a mother to her child. The melody wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and Sarah felt her body relaxing, felt the tension she'd been carrying for years beginning to dissolve. The scent of lavender intensified one final time, so strong and sweet that it seemed to fill her entire being. She felt weightless, suspended between earth and sky, held by invisible hands that meant her no harm. The music played on, each note perfect and necessary, guiding her somewhere safe. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on her back in the middle of the harvested field. The moon had moved significantly across the sky, suggesting hours had passed, though it felt like only minutes. The lavender around her was short and harvested once more, no trace of the magical regrowth remaining. The night was silent except for the crickets, and there was no sign of Isabelle or her impossible violin. For a moment, Sarah wondered if she had dreamed the entire thing. Perhaps she had fallen asleep on the cottage steps and wandered out here in some kind of trance. But then she breathed in, and the scent of lavender was still there, stronger than it should be, clinging to her skin and hair like a blessing. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from lying on the ground. As she did, something caught the moonlight near her hand. A single lavender stem, impossibly fresh and fragrant, with blooms that glowed faintly even in the darkness. She picked it up carefully, cradling it as if it might disappear at any moment. It was real. It had all been real. Sarah got to her feet and began walking back toward the cottage, her bare feet remembering the path even in darkness. Her mind was spinning, trying to process everything she had witnessed, everything she had felt. Part of her wanted to run to the Beaumont house, to wake everyone and tell them what had happened. But a deeper, wiser part of her knew this was a secret to be kept, a gift meant only for her. As she reached the cottage steps, she paused and looked back at the fields. They lay quiet and still under the moon, giving no indication of the magic they held. But Sarah knew better now. She understood that there were layers to reality, hidden depths that revealed themselves only to those patient enough to look, to listen, to truly be present. She went inside and placed the glowing lavender stem in a glass of water on her nightstand. Then she lay down in bed, not bothering to change out of her clothes. Exhaustion was pulling at her, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came after experiencing something profound. As she closed her eyes, she could still hear the echo of Isabelle's music, distant but unmistakable. It would stay with her, she realized. Not just for tonight, but forever. It would be there in quiet moments, in times when the world felt too loud and too fast, reminding her that there was more to life than what could be seen on the surface. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through her window and birdsong filling the air. For a moment, she lay still, wondering if the previous night had indeed been a dream. But then she turned her head and saw the lavender stem on her nightstand, still glowing faintly even in daylight, and she smiled. At breakfast, Madame Beaumont noticed something different about her. "You look refreshed," the older woman said in her accented English. "The harvest agreed with you, I think?" Sarah smiled and nodded, not trusting herself to speak about what had really happened. How could she explain that she had been given a gift beyond measure, that she had been allowed to glimpse something most people would never believe existed? After breakfast, she took a walk back to the fields. In daylight, they looked perfectly ordinary, rows of harvested lavender waiting for next year's growth cycle. But as Sarah stood at the edge of the field where she had encountered Isabelle, she closed her eyes and listened. Really listened. And there, beneath the sound of the wind and the birds and the distant traffic on the rural road, she heard it. A faint melody, barely perceptible but undeniably present. The music of the fields, the song of the earth itself, playing eternally for anyone with ears to hear it. She opened her eyes and breathed in deeply, letting the lavender-scented air fill her lungs. Whatever happened next, wherever life took her after this summer ended, she would carry this moment with her. The knowledge that magic still existed in the world, that there were forces older and wiser than human understanding, and that sometimes, if you were very lucky and very still, you might be allowed to witness them. Sarah spent the rest of the day helping to prepare the harvested lavender for processing, working alongside the Beaumont family and the other volunteers. The work was satisfying in its simplicity, the repetitive motions allowing her mind to wander. She found herself thinking about her life back in Boston, about the job she would need to return to in a few weeks, about the apartment that had never quite felt like home. But something had shifted inside her. The desperation she had felt when she first arrived, the sense that she was running away from something she couldn't face, had transformed into something else. She wasn't running anymore. She was simply being present, exactly where she was supposed to be, for as long as she was meant to be here. That evening, as the sun set over the hills and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah sat once more on the cottage steps. She held a cup of tea and watched the light fade, waiting to see if the music would return. But the fields remained silent, at least to ordinary ears. She wasn't disappointed. Some gifts were meant to be given only once. She understood now. The encounter with Isabelle had been a singular moment, a crossing of paths that would never happen again in quite the same way. But that didn't diminish its power or its importance. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, Sarah thought about all the people who had walked these fields over the centuries. How many of them had heard Isabelle's music? How many had been chosen to witness the impossible? There was no way to know, but Sarah suspected she was part of a small and special group, bound together across time by a shared experience they could never fully explain. She finished her tea and went inside, ready for sleep. As she lay in bed, the glowing lavender stem casting gentle light across the room, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The music played on in her memory, a lullaby that would carry her into dreams and beyond, a reminder that the world was far stranger and more beautiful than she had ever dared to imagine. And in the fields outside, The lavender roots drank in the moonlight and remembered everything, waiting patiently for the next person who would learn to truly listen.